What is a woman? It's a controversial question today, and if we were to go back in time 50 years, people would look at you stupid for asking it. When I was born, people would basically just look at your external genitalia and assign you your sex at birth. In very rare instances, that didn't line up with how you presented as an adult. And I want to say in the 80s, it was 1 in 30,000 who would present differently than they were assigned at birth. And that's assuming you don't have ambiguous genitalia. People who are born and they can't be assigned at birth, those are a very rare instance as well. And each of those was taken on a case-by-case basis. Now, I firmly believe that the doctors and parents had the best interests of the child at heart. And today we're running into a much more complicated setup where you have the traditional classical biological definitions, and now there are more social definitions that are involved. And, traditionally the biological was amplified by social definitions, and they were anybody who didn't fit in was suppressed. Anybody who didn't fit the standard biosocial definition was suppressed and marginalized and ignored. And in some cases, really extreme things would happen to these people. Today, the people who didn't fit what used to be a small number of people who didn't fit are now being highlighted and accepted into society and treated like what they're doing is totally fine and acceptable. I agree with that. I agree. Everybody should be treated as if they are equal in the eyes of society, in the eyes of the law. The only time you should be treated differently is when your behavior impacts other people. And that's a big part of what's going on right now, a lot of the yelling. So I guess my definition of a woman today, I can say the biological definition, and that hasn't changed as far as I'm concerned. The social...
Are you a biologist, though?
I do have a biology background. I have a life sciences degree. And I would say that the biological definition of a woman is someone who was born with XX chromosomes, and they developed physiologically in a manner consistent with that genotype. That's the biological definition of a woman. And the social definition, I used to feel like, oh, no, these are the definitions, these are the rules, and these things don't change. And as a child, it's really easy to think that everything's going to stay the same. No, everything has to stay exactly the same. My bedroom has to stay exactly the same. I still need the race car bed with red sheets and blue pillows. And one day that gets changed, and it can be a little traumatic when you're 4 to have things turned around. But as we get older, we see that all sorts of things do change. For instance, this is an ear, and we use it for hearing. Biologically, this was created to chew food. It was originally made to chew food. And over time, evolution has repurposed the jaw many times. And the nose and the ears were both originally part of the jaw. So you've got evolution making changes. Now, evolution can take millions and billions of years to make changes. Society can change much faster. So we've got a very new and interesting development happening, because the definition of a woman and what is a woman seems to be in flux right now. And it's a very big hot topic that can cause a lot of emotion and a lot of difficulty when you just want to treat everybody well and get along, because not everybody agrees on what used to be traditional and accepted definitions.
Yeah. And I think that is a key thing here. I think all three of us, we enjoy having conversations like this, and we're here to talk about as some of y'all might have assumed, probably by the title or wherever you're reading this, we're going to be talking about the recent documentary by Matt Walsh, who works for the Daily Wire. He's independent. No, he's not independent because he works for the Daily Wire. But he made a documentary called What is a Woman? And in the West, it seems to be that this is an actual question. And that's why Edward has been telling us about this. And I decided to watch this. I think the three of us are kind of political fanatics in a certain way. So a lot of the issues that were brought up in this film and around this question are things we have been familiar with and aware of. But we wanted to just talk about that with people out there, talk about it together, and just focus on that documentary itself. And as Edward said, there's definitions of certain things that we just use, that we take for granted, that something as basic as men, women, boy, girl, like we think these are simple terms, but to some people, it's really not that simple. For me, I've kind of in general understood these terms to have three different sections. There's kind of the initial part, male, female. And I think these things get mixed together. Male, female, that's strictly biological, X, 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 Y. There's some issues in there where you can have some, I think you can have X, X, Y, X, X, Y, or yeah, there's some X, X, Y people. There's some situations where you could have some smaller things with the chromosomes, but that's a straight thing. Male, female, you can tell that from skeletal structure. You can tell that from DNA. You can tell that from many other signals. You don't actually have to even have a live specimen to tell male, female in that situation. Now, when it comes to man, woman, boy, girl, that's the second term of it. Now, I think that has an aspect of biology and culture. I've moved around to several different countries and continents and things like that, and the definitions or the expectations of what a boy should be in France, in Kenya, in the United States of America, different parts of the United States of America are very varied. The definition of what a woman is expected to do and be in that society, and in my estimation, that was like the male and the female when they're at a younger age, that's boy girl, with the cultural societal expectations of what they're going to do, the abilities and responsibilities, and then once they cross into adulthood, I understood that to be male, to be man, woman. Now that will differ. Like a woman in the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia, is going to have a different sort of identity and expectations than a woman in the village in somewhere in Quisero, Kenya, where my folks are from. Like those definitions are going to be very different of what is expected from that person. That's something I experienced personally, being a 5-year-old moving from France, coming to Kenya, and then I left Kenya when I was like 10, 11, and then I got to the United States of America. And the way boys and girls were treated in Kenya versus the way boys and girls were treated in Bethesda, Maryland was vastly different. So I had to relearn some of these things in my estimation. And that's just been some ongoing process that I've had in my life. And then the last part is masculine feminine. Now, masculine feminine, that's almost entirely behavioral. That has nothing to do with actual sex or doesn't have anything to do with the gender. Now that's culture and behavior. Now, one example is here in Kenya, it's very common to see men just walking around holding hands. Yet the culture itself is way more homophobic, or actually homophobic to the point where they're antagonistic towards homosexuality. Yet it's just considered to be a regular thing. But yet you got to the United States of America, and that was something that was not really a common thing of just holding hands. One of the things that had already changed was when we were 10 and around that age, we used to just play in the playground together, boys and girls. Everybody in general used to have short hair. Some girls started growing their hair longer and things like that. But in general, they would just play together in groups. But I got to the United States of America, and that's middle school. There's already like cooties, or like if you hang out with a girl, like are you dating that girl? That's already there in the United States of America at that age. So there's certain masculine and feminine things that might change in different places. Whereas in the United States of America, it's more common to see women holding hands that are just friends. Here in Kenya, I don't have, you don't really see it with women too, but you can see it with men. In the United States of America, I think if you in general see two men walking around holding hands, like talking to each other, people would probably think, oh, those people are gay. That's not a thing that comes up here. So that's just with my definition, as I said, currently for my definition of what a woman is, it's an adult female in a certain culture, depending on what the cultural expectations are of that. But adult female was the biology that was expected, and you can present yourself as a female and as a woman, but that doesn't make you the actual woman. Like a simple example is if I'm playing a video game on World of Warcraft or something, my avatar is a female avatar and I don't actually use my voice. People might treat me as a female elf or whatever, but I'm not actually a female elf ever. Even if I behave like a female elf does in that lore, in that game and anything, a woman elf or whatever. I would never be a woman elf, even though I can present and identify as a woman elf. What are your thoughts on that, Stephen, on the things that you said?
Well, I mean, what is a woman? I would go with the traditional definition. I actually learned a term recently, biological conservative. I guess that's what I am. I would go with that. I would go with that term. Um, I do, I am more flexible on certain things. Like I don't believe like boys have to like blue, girls have to like pink, things like that. But I do believe there are general biological differences between men and women, and that we'll get into it as the discussion progresses. But even surgery, hormones, and everything, you're not going to change all that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So with this film, as I mentioned, it's something that we've a documentary. Would it be a documentary film? It's a documentary, right? And
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, let's actually introduce the film. We have not
Yeah.
actually done that yet. The film
Okay.
that we all watched is What is a Woman by Matt Walsh, who is a conservative commentator, journalist, pundit, comedian, meme maker, all those kinds of things. I'm not too familiar with Matt Walsh myself. I've never found his commentary to be particularly appealing. I did watch this movie, though, and I was surprised at how approachable most of it was. The last 15 minutes was what I was expecting to see throughout the entire documentary. But for the most part, he seemed fairly low-key and reasonable. But of course, he edited it, so who knows what he did before or in between those little cuts. But for me, it was a pleasant surprise to see him just asking very calm, gentle questions and not throwing bombs until the final 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Stephen, thoughts on the documentary?
Yeah, because I was gonna say I had a similar view. I mean, I guess I'm more sympathetic to Walsh. Like I've shared a bunch of his tweets. I don't listen to him regularly. I've listened to his show a little bit. I didn't find it that interesting, but some of his tweets are good, and I thought it was fair. He asked fair questions, but also I think I told you one of my friends pushed back against this, saying like, "Oh, he interviewed people who didn't know what they were talking about." But I actually think the opposite. I think he deliberately sought out people who knew what they were talking about. I mean, we'll get into it, but like, he talked to like doctors, professor, a congressperson. Like the whole point is to show these are people who deal with this stuff every day. So if people are going to know what they're talking about, it's them. But it's like if they're still giving unsatisfactory answers, it's like, well, this is worth re-examining.
Yeah. And when it comes to stuff like this, a similar thing with me, I'd seen some of his tweets. I think he's pretty straightforward. Was it straight laced? I don't know. Like he has his general presentation. He's kind of got this monotone, flat, just direct presentation. He doesn't really seem to get too emotional. And some of these topics are relatively emotional, especially the people who seem to care about that. And I'll get back to the whole people who claim to care about it and the general reaction they get. And it can be a heated topic for the people who are involved in this. I wouldn't say space or in this ideation or in identifying as LGBT or just trying to question these things. For some people, they seem to be both on the right and the left, on the other side, people who think they should be able to identify as anything, and then the people who think, no, you can't change anything. There's some people who seriously think not having a solid accepted definition of a woman is actually a sign of societal collapse. I'm not that far into it, but then there's some people who are also like, you can't define it, like there's no actual definition for it. And no, I think words need to mean things. And in my general estimation, my general observation about the world in general is problems occur not because of what X is, but because of how we define X. So if you think this is a bigger problem than it is, you might care a lot more about this. If you don't think it's as big an issue as it is, you might not care, and then it might actually end up being something else. So I think it's worthwhile actually talking about this actual topic. And I think Matt Walsh did a good job of presenting this. And I listened to an interview of his, and he just said that he didn't even think it was going to be this big of a deal. Like he was just kind of going out with this question. And you see, he walks around to different places, talks to different people, reached out to different people. And even in the documentary, the people who he's interviewing talk to him and say like, yes, like one of them specific says like, yeah, when you told me about this, you even brought the questions. So it's not some kind of subterfuge thing. He told them, I'm making this documentary. Here are the questions that I'm actually going to do it. He wasn't hiding under some pseudonym like Borat or like Sacha Baron Cohen going in and trying to like gotcha these people. He wasn't just going man on the street type of things. He definitely went and talked to these people. And it being an official documentary, I'm assuming these people could have signed a waiver to say don't put this on there. He had to get their approval and things like that. So, as presenting a documentary in the actual as an actual product, I think it was a pretty good product. Like Edward said, just came in, and he has a message as well. He's trying to get a point through, and I don't know. I think we'll kind of just probably pivot now into just a general discussion. Just give a general review. My suggestion is most definitely take your time to go watch it, whether you are politically involved or not. I think it's interesting to see this, both to understand what I think somebody who's relatively even keel on the political right, on the conservative side of Western politics, United States politics, just to see someone who Matt Walsh is, because some of you might have heard of him from people who don't really like him, and they're painting him as this kind of demon, and he's not. He's a father with, was it two girls and one boy? Was it two girls and two boys? I don't know.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, he's a father. He's a rather average, straightforward American type of guy. I've met people like him, and then he talks to people who are also out there on the political left, and you can see people who are supposed experts in their field trying to discuss those things. People who are supposedly in that situation of re-identifying or changing the definition of what a woman is, who are living that and speaking from their lived experience. And I think it's worthwhile to actually see and just to get a general idea on something so basic like man and woman, defining a woman, how people can disagree, not be able to understand a term that we might in general take for granted. And he even comes here to Nairobi, Kenya, where I'm at. I don't know if he was in Nairobi, but he even comes to Kenya to talk to some people. And you can see how for people in other parts of the world, that question might be a lot simpler than it is for a certain group of people in the United States of America.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think...
One thing I was just going to add, the point about definitions I think is really important. Like, for those who don't know, I actually have a friend who majored in gender studies, and I was asking her about some of this stuff, and she had trouble answering a lot of questions and defining a lot of things. But I was saying to her, I always think of what Stefan Molyneux said a while back about how if you want the average person on the street to relate to your ideas, you have to communicate them in clear, simple, straightforward terms. If you ask all these people and they can't give direct answers, it's like, and people like us who follow this stuff regularly, and like, we don't fully know what you're trying to say. Like, how is the average person going to make sense of it? And then if they can't make sense of it, why should they go along with it? Unless you're lying to them.
Yeah.
Well,
And then the thing go ahead.
The line that most comes to my mind right now is the more things change, the more they stay the same. Mm-hmm. Right now, we're facing what looks like an unprecedented change in the definition of women. It looks like society is moving in ways that it has never moved before. And when you look back in history, you see a lot of parallels where the way I see it is that society is constantly trying to figure out a way to be more stable and more strong. And in the past, the big thing that I see as different from the past as opposed to now is that in the past, people were looking at who to exclude, who is causing trouble in our society, and how can we exclude them to make our society stronger and more stable. And today, there's still a powerful force of exclusion. There are people who want to exclude certain people from the conversation. The main difference is that the people who are being targeted for exclusion are now more identified by how they think than by physical or behavioral characteristics that were used to exclude people in the past. And I think that's a good thing. I think it's good that we are not excluding people for behavioral and physical characteristics. Now, some behavioral characteristics do need to be minimized. Violence and other forms of antisocial behavior should be minimized. If you just want to dress differently, though, you should be accepted into society. Now, the desire to exclude people because they disagree with you, that is still very strong, and that's an unhealthy behavior, in my opinion. I feel like disagreement is part of what makes a strong and stable society, and the people who want to exclude people like Matt Walsh because he disagrees, I think that is a direction that will lead to a less stable society and a less strong society. I don't agree with Matt Walsh on very many things. I do believe he should be allowed to talk, because when you don't allow people to talk, then they get less stable, and then they can destabilize the people around them, and that's not good for society. That's not good for the individual.
And I would also add to that too. And the thing is, the gender theorist people aren't helping their own cause either, because if they're if they're sending him death threats, trying to shut him down and all it shows to people like me is their arguments can't withstand scrutiny. And if that's the case, why should I agree with them? Whereas if they were saying, hey, let's have a talk, and okay, we disagree, but we can part as friends, it would be a different situation. Yeah.
Yeah, politically, we kind of have a lot of agreement between the three of us. More like anarchists in the classical sense of it, where we're just against having like a state having a set of leaders that is above the law, that sets laws, but it's not subject to those laws. And I think we all kind of agree with like the zero aggression principle and non-aggression principle, where the initiation of force is immoral. So like, but at the same point, I think we'd also all agree in a sense of kind of absolute choice when it comes to who to interact with. Like you have the freedom of association. So I have no problem if somebody just says, "Oh, like I don't like people with this kind of hair. Like you need to have an afro. You need to have comb your hair. That's the only reason I'm not letting you into my store." I don't care. Like be allowed. You should be allowed to do that. You should be allowed to pick any reason, and we do that on our day-to-day basis. We don't want to have somebody selecting the people we date. We don't know. Even part of the people who are saying this, "Oh, you can't." Some of the people who are saying you can't tell us we're not a woman will say I am allowed to identify as a woman, and you should call me a woman. You shouldn't be able to call me something I don't want to be called. Yet they will also say we need to keep you away. I'm trying like I think that those people also in general agree that they want a level of acceptance where they say like I should be able to act in the way that I want to act without having to conform to the way you want me to act. But on the same aspect, they say like if I call myself this and I don't want to call myself what you want me to call you, yet you have to call me what I want you to call me. I don't know if that makes any sense. They're saying I should have the freedom to behave the way that I do, associate with the people that I associate with, yet you shouldn't have the freedom to do the same, to say like, okay, we don't agree and accept the way you behave, so we don't want to kind of associate with you. So there's I think a part there that's kind of tough, and that is part of the main question with this what is a woman thing, because I think a key part of this is being taken now further, where it's not just somebody identifying by themselves in their private life as a full-on adult and just living their life that way. This is something that they're trying to get the state to put as actual law. They're trying to get into sports that have been in general accepted to be women, and there's a definition. This is a women's sport. This is man's sport. Now they're going into the schools and teaching this to kids and saying, okay, a kid who's 5, 6 should be able to start deciding that they're not their assigned gender, or now they're going to start transitioning and work their way up to taking like medication, and which is technically chemical castration. That is what is going on in this actual process, and that's actually something that comes up in the film. It's call it what it is. Call it spade a spade. And that's when I think these questions are coming up. What is a woman? What are you telling kids in school? They say, okay, no, these gender roles are there. Like the only reason women want to grow up and be a housemaker and take care of kids and pick dolls to play with is because of the programming that society has, these antiquated gender roles. And they're saying, oh no, at the same point, we need to kind of tell the kids who are more gender fluid and want to transition, we need to tell them it's ideation, otherwise they'll not be able to embrace that aspect of themselves. Or they'll say like, oh, telling the kids these things doesn't actually raise the ability, raise the number of them. So you see that point. They're saying kids want to be typical men, typical women because of gender roles, that tradition that society teaches them. Yet me going to school and talking about queer theory and those things has no actual effect on the actual kids deciding to no effect on having an uptick of transgenderism and things like that in certain places. And those two things don't necessarily mesh. And to me, that is my main frustration and why I appreciate this this documentary by Matt Walsh, is because I am very keen on actual definitions. Words should mean what they mean. If you don't mean that word, come up with a new word. Don't tell me this word means that word, and then don't be able to actually define to me what the hell that word is. And that was the primary thing that was going through this whole thing. Everybody I think he interviewed, he did ask them, what is a woman? There might have been 1 or 2 people he did get around to asking, but that was the general question he was asking people. And that's the general question that I think y'all out there who are watching this, and thank y'all for watching, should think, what is your simple definition of a woman? And I think before we go on, let me just read the definition here that's from Merriam-Webster. And this is one that I think most people seem to understand and accept, but for some people, this might not be appropriate. It says here, okay, so a woman, which is a noun, and it says plural is women, and definition is 1A, an adult female person. B, a woman belonging to a particular category as birth, residence, membership, or occupation, usually used in combination, like councilwoman. Then 2 was womankind. 3, distinctively feminine nature, womanliness. 4, a woman is who is a servant or a personal attendant. Then 5 is chiefly dialectical and wife, mistress, girlfriend, sense, the second sense. And then 6, a woman who is extremely fond or devoted to something specified. I'm a chocolate woman through and through. And but one bite of West's banana pudding cupcake, and I was sold. So that's the general things of showing how it can be applied in a sense. It can just be the adult female person, but then it goes into these other definitions of things. And I think, I don't know who disagrees with these simple definitions of woman, but that seems to be something that needed to be asked. And a lot of the people couldn't seem to answer that this simple question.
Well, the point that always comes up too is they'll say, "Oh, I was assigned this, but I identify as this," and that's where he said, like, "Can I identify as black? Can I identify as an animal?" And then it's like they push back because they realize it's absurd, but then it's like, okay, but why isn't it absurd the other way? And a lot of people won't push back because they're scared of being labeled bigots.
Yeah.
I'd like to make a point of clarification. Earlier, Stephen, you said that gender activists are sending death threats to Matt Walsh. I'd like to point out that we're getting a skewed sample because the only people who are getting attention are the ones who are making antisocial and violent threats. There are plenty of people who are gender activists who are transgender activists, gender activists, feminists, and many other ists who are extremely peaceful and cooperative and willing to talk. Matt Walsh was not particularly looking for people who wanted to have a conversation. He was looking for people who would fit his agenda as well. And there are plenty of people out there who want to fight about this. One of the most common refrains I hear is, "There are lives at stake," as if that's a phrase that should just shut down all conversation and allow their position to simply win. The problem with that is there are lives at stake. There are a lot of lives at stake here, and we need to make sure that we do the best that we can to ensure the protection of the individual and protect them from aggression, protect them from self-harm, protect them from unnecessary confusion. And there's a lot to unpack there. Now, some people like to say, well, 99.9% of the time this happens. Well, we've got 7 billion people on the planet. That means there are millions of people who do not fit in. I have a friend who was born not compatible with life. Their insides were on their outsides. And if it weren't for medical science, this person would have died. Now, their genotype was XY, but reconstructive surgery could only go so far. So it was suggested that they be raised female, raised to identify as a woman. As an adult, when this person found out, it was quite a shock to them, led to a lot of confusion and difficulty. And now they identify as asexual and non-binary. They do not, they changed their name, and I'm not going to mention any names, protection of privacy and all that. They were genetically male at birth, but they did not present as male. They did not present as something that can actually live beyond birth.
Yeah.
The doctors were able to put them back together, and now they have changed their name and they identify as neither male nor female. And I have nothing but compassion and love and support. And with this person, we can sit down and have a good conversation and talk about things without getting into heated arguments or fights. We can just be mature, responsible adults about it. And that's difficult to do. That's
Yeah.
difficult to do because there are a lot of downsides coming in here.
Yeah.
And even though the situation may be unique, the type of situation is not unique. Every generation faces an inclusion and exclusion problem of some kind or another. In many cases, multiple forms of inclusion and exclusion. When I was in high school, there were three films in particular that addressed this very issue. There was The Crying Game, which was about a trans woman who presented very well as a woman, and a cis hetero white male who fell in love with her.
Hmm.
And they had a very complicated, dramatic story. It was really, really good. It's called The Crying Game. It's a very,
Crying
very
Game.
good movie. And then there were two other movies that were Tu Wong Fu, Thanks for Everything, was somewhat lighthearted. You had Wesley
Yeah, that was a bit
Snipes
more
and Patrick
tongue in cheek.
Swayze, and I forget the third actor's name. They basically represented cross-dressers. At least that's how
Yeah,
they were called at the
that's quite a
time.
different thing, though, isn't it? Like drag is
Well,
an entirely different thing than transgenderism.
it used to be a different thing. The problem is that you mentioned earlier that you like definitions and you don't want definitions to change. The reality is that language is very fluid and we can't control it. One of my biggest concerns about the current movement is that there is a large group of activists who want to control the definitions. And the reality is you can't control the definitions. It reminds me of a South Park episode where Chef was talking about how white people keep appropriating black terms. And so he has to keep changing the slang that he's using in order to differentiate himself from the white people who keep appropriating his slang.
Mm-mm.
And he invents a new term, and immediately Mr. Garrison appropriates it. And it just causes him no end of frustration. And the reality is that language is whatever I want it to be. Whatever a word, okay, when you say a word, it creates an image and a feeling in my mind. And it creates an image and a feeling in your mind. And the closer these images and feelings are, the more we understand each other. But you can't control the image and the feeling that that word creates in my mind, and I can't control it in yours. And if we
Yeah.
want to communicate, then we need to be open-minded, and we need to listen, and we need to try to understand. And that's the biggest problem right now, last week, last year, last decade, last century, last millennium. That's the main problem about communication is at what point does the willingness to try break down? And then when that happens, you tend to destabilize society. You can get violence, and in some cases, it can start wars.
Yeah.
But
Well,
at the same point,
even sorry, just
go
one thing I
ahead.
was gonna say. I mean, even what counts as violence. I mean, silence is violence. Words are violence. Burning down and looting isn't. I mean, that alone is a redefinition.
Well, and
But
that's
I
just it.
think
Words can be redefined. They're constantly changing their meaning, and it's very frustrating because nobody can control it, and the words just do what they want to do.
Yeah.
I think the thing is when you're having a conversation, like we started this conversation by kind of defining what we thought, what we define as a woman. We put that definition there, and we seem to agree on the definition. So even though we're living in three different places right now, with okay, if you just think, what are you going to have for dinner today? We all kind of, in general, understand dinner is the meal you eat at the end of the day in general. But then what I have in my mind when I think of dinner, the actual foods that are in there are going to be different from the foods that Edward is thinking about, going to be different from the foods that Stephen is thinking about. Then I can ask you, Edward, what do you define as dinner? Then you can tell me because you are saying that word, having something in your mind that that word is actually represented. So even though what in your mind might be different from what in my mind that that word is representing, there's something in your actual mind that actually means something. And what I've noticed is some people will literally just say words and not have anything in their mind. They're saying the word to say the word. And that's one of the issues that I seem to find in this. Matt Walsh has a definition of woman. If you ask Matt Walsh, what is a woman? He'll answer that question. You ask these people, and I can't really answer in this context. What do you mean in this kind of sense? It's kind of flexible. One of them just got up and left. Like, so I'm wondering, do those people using the word woman, have an actual definition in their mind about women? Are they actually engaged in a process of trying to have understanding, trying to actually build a stronger civilization, a stronger society, come to a point where they're like, okay, that's what a woman was. We're trying to define woman as this now. And one of the frustrations of something that I noticed at a very young age, learning different languages, different cultures, different kind of estimates and things, when you're trying to understand what something is, you can't define a word by using that word into it. And that's one of the questions he asked somebody. Can you tell me the definition of woman without using woman? And that stumped a couple of the people in it. And I'm like, if you can't define the word without actually using the word, maybe don't use the word. That's just my general estimation of functional communication, functional conversations that's actually constructive to actually build a better future.
At this point, I think it's important to make a distinction between people who are honestly grappling with a difficult question and a difficult situation, and then those on both sides of the question who are not acting in good faith and are looking at self-promotion. Now, I would say even many of the gender studies professors and professionals in Matt Walsh's documentary, I would say many of them were doing their best to operate in good faith. And it's very confusing for them because we're looking at a complex issue, and then there are strong political forces that are attempting to co-opt the question. There are activists out there who want to say that if you say you are a woman, then you are a woman, and cis hetero men should be willing to date you, and that there is absolutely no difference between the physical presentation of XX and the physical representation of XY if the person puts their mind to it. That's going to be a very difficult bridge to cross. And for activists who want to be able to say your gender and your sex is whatever you think it is at any given time, that's going to be a hurdle that has been attempted in the past in smaller ways, and it failed. Maybe they'll figure out some way to change it now. I mean, we're in the middle of a genetics revolution right now. Let's make no bones about this. It's entirely possible that within the next century, we'll be able to take somebody who is XY and turn them into somebody who is XX. Now, that's mind-blowingly advanced science, but we might be able to do it. And if we do that, then you will be able to take somebody who is genotypically XY and turn them into XX. And that's possible. We might actually pull that off. Until we pull that off, I anticipate there will be a lot of resistance from society at large. This actually reminds me of the early 70s when I was growing up. There was this idea that gender expression was only a social construct. And so they would take trucks and guns and have little girls play with the trucks and the guns, and the boys play with the dolls and the doll houses. And they were extremely frustrated because these children would automatically revert to things. The little girls, in some cases, would take a truck and then cradle it and rock it to sleep. And then the little boy would pick up a Barbie doll and use it like a gun. And I just said little boy there and little girl. It's very hard to talk about these things accurately in a way that's easy to understand. These situations were very difficult. And so what the researchers said was that, oh, we didn't get to them young enough. And they already had these subconscious cues. And I've seen parents grapple with this. They're grappling with it right now, but they were grappling with it when I was 5 in 1977. They were grappling with a similar question. It's not the exact same question, but when they were trying to show that boys and girls don't actually have inborn instincts towards one set of gendered behavior, that thesis has not yet been proven. In fact, there's a lot of evidence pointing to each child having some kind of inborn proclivity. Now, there's a lot that we don't know about this. So there's room for enormous amounts of research to be done. And what's got everybody riled up into a heightened state of emotion is the fact that lives are at stake here. And on the one hand, if you are trans, you have an extremely high chance of committing suicide. And the question there is how much of that risk comes from social ostracizing, and how much of that risk comes from the internal confusion of not having your gender identity in your head line up with the biological genotype that you were conceived with. And it's a very difficult, complicated question. And on the other end of things, there are people who are saying, oh, you're just doing this for political reasons, and you're taking somebody who does have a gender identity that is consistent with their genotype, and you're convincing them that they don't. And there is evidence that some people are just confused. It's like when I was a kid, I grew up with all girls. So you better bet that I had some gendered confusion. I always knew I was a boy, but I didn't know what that meant. And we moved around a lot. So it's not like I had a consistent group of male friends to help me explore what it meant to be a boy. I was surrounded by girls, and my dad would go to work, and then it would be my mom and my sisters with me. And it was very, very confusing. And that's for me. I fit into the standard model of male. So, and it was confusing for me. What if I didn't fit into the standard model? Oh boy, that would be really, really rough.
Yeah.
And we need to protect the people who are confused and legitimately want to explore their identity. And on the one hand, you have people who want to exploit that for political reasons. And then on the other hand, you have people who want to suppress different forms of expression for socio-political reasons. And then there's, I think most people just want to get along and they don't want to get attacked. And so the reason why most people can't answer the question, what is a woman, with a clear, simple answer, is because they want to get along with everybody and they want everyone to feel included, and they're not sure how to do that. There are activists on both sides who are looking to cause trouble and gain politically from it. But the majority of people, I'm firmly convinced, really do just want to get along and allow everybody to express themselves.
Yeah, people in general might be good and nice, but I don't think it's a positive thing to just want to get along. And even if that means not having actual understanding, I think part of the way people do get along is having some understanding. Like you told us about the experience that you had with that friend of yours. That's a condition. We understand that is not a normal thing. To normalize something that is unusual is not doing that. He's not doing justice to the reality of the case. Like getting to understand that person's life, understanding the things they've been through, has made you more empathetic to them, has made you want to understand what they're going through more. So if you're not able to actually define a thing, if you're just saying we're not going to define it for the sake of getting together, I don't think that helps the actual cause of getting together. That doesn't help the actual cause of making an environment where people are not under attack for certain things. Because if something can be anything, then it's really nothing there to actually begin with. And I think we're really seeing certain problems with this happening. And as I mentioned before, I think that the difference between the biology versus the gender versus the behavior, those are three different things: male, female, boy, girl, woman, man, and then feminine, masculine. Those are three different things, yet those things just get constantly put in there. Like you said, with the tech coming, that's definitely, I mean, we've discussed that, probably have a separate discussion just talking about the whole, like people call it transhumanism in a negative way. I'm like, get me that cyborg body, I'm ready for it. But for example, if you have is it the kidney or a kidney transplant or something like that, you can get a kidney transplant from a female. Like me, a black male or Negro male, you get a kidney transplant from an Asian female. That kidney is technically genetically of an Asiatic Oriental body with XX, right? Like there's some, no, sorry, is there even XX genes in the whole like body and the kidney? But it's a female's body.
Every cell except for the gametes and the blood cells has your entire genotype. I mean,
So
there
when
are a
that's
few other
in
minor
me,
exceptions, but yeah, your kidney is chock full of your genetic material that you were assigned at conception.
yeah. So technically, I would have a female body part in me, but that doesn't turn me into a woman. Doesn't turn me into a female. Now, there could be a certain point. What point would it have to be like 50% where you get like 50% of your organs now switched from a female organs into male organs, and then all of a sudden you become a more female than you are male? You get to the point where like we've talked about our genes do a turnaround where it's like every seven years or so, pretty much all our actual cells have renewed themselves and not the same cells that we had when you were actually born. So you're actually a new version of you. So there's definitions, there's things in there where we understand there is some kind of flux. There are some kind of changes happening. Even the term transgender kind of assumes that you're transitioning somewhere. Whether you want to say it's a spectrum, but there's transitioning. You can't really transition if there's no actual points, beginning or end, or locations. If you're just in general floating, floating is different than transitioning from one place to another. Does that make any sense?
There's a point that I'd like to make here about the prefix trans. Trans is actually is actually used scientifically, and it goes along with cis. And I learned this in organic chemistry. They're terms to describe position relative to a substrate. If you have a molecule and you have two appendages on that molecule that are positioned like this, then they are cis. If they're positioned like this,
okay, so
then they're
transpose
trans.
kind of.
Or if they're positioned like this, they're trans. If they're like this, it's cis, this, it's trans, this can also be trans, and that can be trans. So it's actually a conformational description. So transitioning is different. That's actually not a transitioning is about action, and trans is about conformation, is about your physical position in space. And so for transsexuals versus cis or hetero, well, cis and trans, it's just about how you identify relative to your genes. If you are cis, then that means your presentation is together with your genes. If you're trans, then your situation is not together with your genes. And that's
okay,
the
but it's
scientific.
still in relation to something else, right? There's still a thing that's
Yes.
it's in relation to. So if you're like a transgender woman, there's still a woman. Technically, there should be a woman that's in relation your position to transgender man. There's a man that you're in position to, right?
Yes, and while I've given a definition for cis and trans, that is not the definition that we can expect to still have in 20 years. I would like to use slang again as an example because slang morphs in language much faster than proper speech. And for instance, it used to be considered very profane to say God's wounds. It was something that you would say, like if you hit your thumb, you'd be like, oh, God's wounds, and you're referring to the holes in Jesus's hands when he's being crucified. And that was so vulgar that people would then use a slurring of that phrase, zounds. God's wounds slurred is zounds. And then that was an acceptable form of slang until it wasn't. And today it's not even slang. It's just an archaic accident that we don't recognize anymore. And the different slangs cycle in and out all the time. For instance, in the 60s, it was, if you said, oh, that's bad, man, that meant good. And all sorts of inversions and replacements and sublimations happen with language all the time. And you're right, there is a root definition from which we all start. Just like my ear started out as part of my jaw, but I still don't say this is my jaw. And if I say that this is my jaw, then you're going to be understandably confused and maybe a little upset because you might think that I'm intentionally trying to deceive you. And fortunately, we don't have any serious issues right now with the relationship between the jaw and the ear. I bring that up simply because we don't have issues with it, so we can talk about the ear versus the jaw without our emotions getting involved in it. Because as soon as your emotions get involved, things get a lot more complicated. It's a lot harder to understand and communicate when you're emotional and the other person is emotional and your emotions don't line up. When your emotions are the same, when your emotions with somebody else are cis, then everything's fine. As soon as your emotions become trans with somebody else, then it gets a lot more complicated and a lot more difficult. And so this question about what is a woman, while it seems like it should have a simple answer, the real question, the underlying question is, how do we fit everybody into a stable, strong society to where everyone is allowed full expression of their own identity? And in the documentary, there were two things that I'd like to point out that go in relation to this. There was an attempt to talk about reality and objective truth. And there were some people who were not willing to define reality or objective truth, and they didn't like the idea that those terms should even be discussed. Now, I'm a big fan of talking about truth and reality, and that often irritates people because everybody wants a nice, simple definition, but there isn't a simple definition. I fit into the category of people who believe that an absolute understanding of truth is not possible currently with our current weak brains. We can come up with approximations, like if I want to make dinner and I need a teaspoon of salt, I'm not going to get out a scale that is accurate to a 10,000th of a gram, because close enough is close enough. We come up with approximations. But if a recipe calls for exactly 1 teaspoon of salt and I want to get picky about it, I could say no one has ever measured exactly 1 teaspoon of salt, ever. First off, Stephen, you're muted. Your audio is not.
The audio's gone off again. All right, having some issues with Stephen there. But yeah, go ahead.
So I was saying you can make a sound argument that no one has ever measured an exact teaspoon of salt, and yet they still manage to make chocolate chip cookies. And as long as chocolate chip cookies don't get controversial, then we don't have to worry about measuring the teaspoon of salt. Now, when we're talking about the definition of what is a woman, and the underlying issue is, how do we include people? How do we allow people to explore their identities and come up with the healthiest self-identity possible? That's a much more complicated question than just asking, what is a woman? And if we want to know why the question, what is a woman, is so complicated today, we can't really explain that without talking about identity confusion and the exploration for the authentic self. And it's hard to know where the authentic self ends and your biological self or your environmental self begins. It's a very complicated definition. And in the past, it was, we need lots of babies, so your body can make babies, or at least it looks like it can make babies, so you should be a woman. And your body doesn't look like it can make babies, so you must be a man. And then they came up with really strict top-down gender roles. Society came up with really strict top-down gender roles for people who should be able to make babies and people who shouldn't be able to make babies. And then everybody was expected to conform to those two ideas. And if they didn't, then they would be ostracized. They'd be killed. They'd be stoned to death. They'd be burned at the stake. In some cultures, they would be revered as shamans or oracles and special gurus, spiritual people. But generally, even those spiritual people were set apart from society and excluded. and they would be much lonelier. Sometimes they would be aggressed against. It was really, really rough. And that was because society had a very simple definition of what acceptable gender expression was. And so today, we're at a point now where we don't need people who can make babies to pop out as many babies as possible just to keep the species going. And so that allows women to actually question, what is a woman? 1,000 years ago, you say, what is a woman? A baby maker. And I'm popping them out as fast as I can. And every time I pop out a baby, the community celebrates. And that makes me feel good. And that makes me identify more as a woman. Well, today, I don't know, if you want to have a baby and if you're capable of gestating a baby and you do that, some people might celebrate your pregnancy and some people might accuse you of destroying the planet. And so for a woman 1,000 years ago, what is a woman? Well, I'm having babies. That makes me a woman. And that's enough for me. Well, what about this person over here? She has a womb, but she can't have babies. Well, that's her problem. I'm fine. And you just exclude the people who don't fit in. And now today, everything has changed so much because medical care has gotten so good. Infant mortality is at historic lows. Food is so plentiful that instead of starving to death, people are eating themselves to death. We live in a world that is truly upside down. And so to me, it's not so much why are people asking what is a woman? It's like, well, why aren't they asking what is a man too? I mean, there's reasons for that, but why hasn't that been brought up? And I think part of it is because men are more disposable. There's a war going on in Ukraine right now, and men are not allowed to leave the country. And I'm completely blown away that that's not a major topic of discussion. If you're a woman and you want to flee Ukraine, you're not allowed to. Or if you're a woman and you want to flee Ukraine, you're allowed to, you're encouraged to, they help you leave. If you're a man between the ages of 18 and 60, they say, no, turn around. Your job is to go throw yourself underneath the treads of a tank and die.
Yeah,
And
they
in
added the
Ukraine,
Ukraine flag to Pride. I think even transgender women were not allowed to leave. They were told you have to stay.
well, that's what I was about to bring up. In Ukraine, at the border crossing, they have a very clear definition of what is a woman. And if you present with masculine genitalia, you are a man and you are not allowed to leave, and you're turned around and thrown back into the mess. And again, it's a very difficult, complicated question. And getting angry and taking political positions and having an agenda makes it complicated. And let me tell you, Putin has an agenda. Zelensky has an agenda. NATO has an agenda. And a lot of people have agendas. Now, hopefully, most people have the agenda of, hey, let's try and figure out how we can get along. This is hard. Life is difficult. I want to express my own identity as well as I can. And if I expect you to allow me to express myself, then I feel obligated to allow you to express yourself. As long as, there's no aggression, you're not taking things from me or demanding behaviors from me. And that's a problem because there are people on both sides of the debate who are demanding proactive action from everybody to support their position. And I feel like that's the core of what is wrong here. You should be allowed to express yourself and your opinion, and I should be allowed to ignore you or embrace you based on my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to also say regarding your salt analogy, it also depends on whether you're cooking or baking, because baking is an exact science, whereas cooking, you can sort of wing it.
Yeah, we have a separate series called Dish on a Dish. You can check that out. We talk about different foods and things like that. It is there are different things, and I think that's also this is also the same thing. It's a different thing if you're just talking, if you're playing a game online, if you're just I want to identify as something. But then now, if you're going into, like here in Kenya, they have a rule where certain positions you have to have like 2/3 of the positions, certain political positions have to be for women. They're set aside for women. So can I just decide to identify as a woman and then go in there and take those positions? When you're going to that level, it gets to be more there's more rigid definition. That's when you get into like the baking. That's when like the actual like the baking of it is coming versus just say I'm just making some stew. I'm just gonna take a pinch of salt and just drizzle some salt in it. And I think that stew of drizzling the salt is when you're on Twitter and you put your pronouns up. It's not that big of a deal. How about certain people who are saying we need certain activism, we need more representation, we need to empower girls? What do they mean by girls? They say girls need women representatives. We need women in movies, women in positions of power. What are those positions of power? Who is supposed to get to those positions of power in order to have who the hell a girl is to identify with that person? Like it's the kind of questions that you're kind of talking about here.
And to elaborate a little bit on the baking analogy, even if you go by an exact recipe, it might not always turn out right because there's issues like your oven can weaken over time. So your oven can say 400, but it won't actually be that hot.
Yeah.
I know in the summer, certain bakeries will add more salt to the bread because it retards the yeast. Because if you're in a humid environment, it blows up the yeast.
Like
so there's things like that
too, right?
Yeah.
If I
so there's
bake a
things like
cake
that.
in cast iron versus glass, I'm going to get vastly different results if
Yeah.
I keep everything the same. And I've actually done that recently. I baked a cake in cast iron, and well, I helped some children bake a cake in cast iron, and because I wasn't closely enough involved, the cast iron did not get preheated, and that caused an unfortunate outcome. And then we did it again, and with a little bit of preheating, everything came out a lot better.
Good.
Now, as far as baking being an exact science, how exact is the question? And when you get into how exact, you're going to get a lot of different answers from people who are using cake mixes. You're going to get a very low resolution answer. If you're talking about a high-end Michelin chef, you're going to get a much more precise answer.
Yeah.
I still bet, though, that I don't need my scale that has doors on it to keep the air currents from influencing the measurement.
Yeah.
Probably not necessary in most baking, even if you're doing molecular gastronomy.
It's not rocket science.
Yeah. I was reading even earlier. I was reading about meringue. I wanted to make meringue crisps using the air fryer, and I was reading that apparently fresher eggs have more acidity, and that the longer you keep eggs, the acidity actually diminishes, and that's why a lot of people either add lemon juice or cream of tartar when making meringue because it stabilizes it. Because if it becomes more basic, the meringue doesn't hold its shape. Thought that was interesting.
Yeah. What is an egg? What is an egg, Stephen? It's a complicated question depending on the utility of the egg.
And I think that's a good example here. And I think with us being, as you said, political junkies, these are topics and things that we've thought about. So I think with this documentary, it's good because some people have just taken that term for granted. They just, a woman is a woman is a woman. That's just kind of how they thought. They didn't think it was worth questioning. And then for some people, it's like a woman is in constant flux. Like it's something you can identify. They're certain about that. That's just the way they are. So to actually have that situation, to understand that some people actually need to have this question asked. And then you wonder, when you said lives are at risk, like how many lives are we talking about? And I think in general, most people would probably get it wrong if asked how many people identify as transgender in the United States of America. Let's just identify, let alone the people who have actually gone through an actual procedure of actual transitioning over. And what do you guys think the numbers are? I don't know if you've looked recently. I have them up, so I'm just gonna ask the two of you. Just give me what you think it is. Maybe you've looked it up recently.
I mean, it's like, isn't it around 1%? Like if you add up all the LGBT whatever, it's actually like low single digits, I think.
Yeah, it's Edward. What do you think?
I would expect low single digits, but I haven't looked at it, and frankly, it's not something I care enough about to look up.
Yeah, they're saying here 1.6 million people 13 plus identify as transgender in the USA.
Oh,
so
less
that's
than 1%.
Identify as 1.6 million. So that's less than 1%. That's
about it's about a third of a percent. No, a little more than that. About a little less than 0.5%, like 0.4%.
Yeah, sounds
so
right.
You have this kind of situation where I think a lot of the transgender people live in certain areas. Like you've looked at certain figures they're saying in certain cities, in certain states, in certain locations, there's a lot higher rate of them than them. So the people who are in that environment might see a lot more people like that. Like something like an example was child pregnancies. In certain locations, it's like you have 5 people in the high school of 500 have child pregnancies. So everybody would have known them in that. but then 5 other schools neighboring it with 500 people have 0. So the total in those areas will be 1 per, let's say 4 other schools have 0. It'll be 1 per 500, but does not necessarily mean it's 1 spread out. Like some of the locations. So if you live in that, if you're in that one school that has those 5, you might think that's a lot bigger an issue than it is. When you live in the areas where they have none, you might think it's a none issue. But when you live in a society, we live in a society, Joker face, when you live in a society like that, there's certain considerations that you discuss. And some people will state that, oh, if you have a 1% kind of driving certain issues, that's such a minor issue. It's not even that big of a deal. But in the inverse, should you still look out for that 1%? How much should be done to accommodate a certain percentage of people in a certain environment? And this is a question that I've asked myself as well, moving to different places. What is normal? Should the society change? When I was in France, I was Negro, of course. Most of the people are French background and things like that. So I was somebody who would be more unusual compared to the people there. Then when I came back to Kenya, I was more normal, like physical wise, biological wise, but I was also speaking French. That made me abnormal because most people here spoke Swahili. So all of a sudden now, should I expect society to learn French to fit in for me? Yet I am the one coming from outside. I am the one who's not in the norm. Then I got to the United States of America. I had certain dynamics going on with certain relationships. And at that point, we were already older. So there were some girls who were more open to just having friendships and not really breaking those lines of like, oh, boys are friends with boys, girls are friends with girls. So a few of them were kind of more flexible with that. And I met those people as there was more choice. But at the same point, I realized like I was the one who was unusual, like having lived in those many different locations and things like that, moving from different places, having different expectations, having different definitions. Like simple thing, my definition of football was actual football with the feet. I got to the United States of America, football was American football with the helmets and the pads and things like that. I'm not the one who's like, y'all need to start calling it football. It's like, no, I'm going to adjust to what's in there. So there's those general questions. 1.6 million of the population, how much should we look at for that 1.6 million? How much should that 1.6 million say, understand that I am the one who's actually in an unusual position here, so I kind of understand why the rest of the people are actually expecting me to actually reach out and understand where they're coming from more. And that's something that I've noticed from moving to different cultures. Once I move to a certain place and I make an attempt to understand, when I get to Italy and I make an attempt to even speak my broken Italian at that time, they're a lot more welcoming than just expecting me like I speak English, you should speak English too. So that's I think a question like how do you actually measure this? How much should we adjust to the trans and how much should they adjust to the rest of society?
Can I go rogue here?
Yeah.
Okay, what you're talking about is the most important question. How much should we care about a very small portion of society? And a big part of the answer to this, I believe, comes from the English department in schools. And that's why I said I want to go rogue, because it sounds like on the surface that the English department and literature has absolutely nothing to do with the trans movement and the questions of personal identity and how society should be constituted. The reality is, though, in my opinion, and I'm a writer, so maybe there's a little bit of my side bias going on here. In my opinion, literature maps very well our ideas as a society as to who is important and why. In fiction, there are 5 modes of storytelling. And this is actually where we're getting to the root of the question. How much should we care about 0.4% of the population? The first mode of fiction is the mythic mode. In myth, you only care about the gods. The second mode of fiction is the romantic mode, where you have people who identify as human, and yet the laws of nature are suspended for them, more or less. Hercules could suspend many laws of nature all the time. Perseus, he could occasionally suspend a law of nature, but it wasn't as common as Hercules. So you've got the mythic, where you only care about gods. Then you've got the romantic era, where you care about people who have godlike pretensions. And then you have what's called the high mimetic, where you have people who identify as people and they can never do anything godlike. Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Octavius, Patton, Barack Obama, these are all examples of the high mimetic. And while some people may say that these figures are godlike or can be godlike, they actually are not godlike, and they are completely subject to the rules of nature. And so that's the third mode. So now we have the mythic mode where it's about gods, the romantic mode where it's about men or humans who can somewhat have godlike attributes. Then you have the high mimetic, the high mimicable, Julius Caesar, Barack Obama kind of people. Okay, I'm not them, but I could see how maybe I could become like them. Then you have the low mimetic, which is regular everyday people, middle class people, poor people, rich people. That's the low mimetic. And then you have the ironic phase. And in the ironic phase, things get turned upside down. You have kings who are supposed to be looking out for the best interests of the people, but they're the villains. You have heroes who turn out to be villains. You have priests who turn out to be atheists. You have atheists who turn out to be very religious. In the ironic mode, you're taking people who present one way but are something else. And when you take these 5 modes of fiction, you can look back through history and you can see the different themes. The further you go back in time, the more the mythic mode was important and was supremely important. And then as you come forward into classical antiquity, then the heroes, the romance heroes, take on their most importance. And then when you get into the early Christian epoch, then it transitions over to the high mimetics of the Caesars and the great generals and the rulers. And then when you get into the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, the low mimetic becomes ascendant. And the 20th century is important because the 20th century is the beginning of the ironic age, where things are not as they seem. And now the reason why we're going down these 5 modes of fiction is because we focus on the area where we think we can gain the greatest value. So in ancient times, focusing on God would get you the greatest value. And then focusing on heroes and trying to be romantic heroes would get us the greatest value. Mimicking Caesar was then important. And then in the Enlightenment, it was focusing on regular people that made us, that was where society could get the most value. And starting in the 20th century, the people who were formerly excluded and persecuted were the place where we have been looking for value. And in the 20th century and now in the 21st century, we're mining the ironic phase of society for value. And so you can say, okay, this group makes up 0.4% of the population. Well, what if Elon Musk came out of that 0.4% of the population? Are you going to say, well, Elon Musk represents such an insignificant fraction of the population, or people like him, let's say self-made billionaires, represent such a tiny fraction of the population that it's okay to ignore them, persecute them, or exclude them from society, or just not care what other people do to them? And the reality is that you never know where the next massive value is going to emerge. Today, we love finding values that are scalable. If you can scale something, that means it has a little bit of utility right now, but I can then scale it up and it can have enormous utility tomorrow. If I write a book that's as good as the Bible or Harry Potter or Stephen King, I wrote one book, but online I can scale that up to 50 billion copies with trivial ease. And so the value of that one book can change the entire planet. And so the question is, in this 0.4% of the population, how much value is society missing because that segment of the population has been excluded in the past? And that, I believe, is the question that we're facing today. And it's a question of great risk. Lives are at stake. It's also a question with great hope and potential for the future. I believe we're entering the age of abundance, where our biggest problem is going to be how to manage the unimaginable wealth that we are creating.
Okay, but again, we see lives are at stake. I think there needs to be a definition of what is the exclusion? What is the exclusion going on right now? What is the sort of protection that is supposedly demanded by this certain group of people? Like right now, it is one of the typical things is we need affirmative action for Negroes, people who are of my client and things like this. And this is kind of a general question I ask people, especially my white friends who might say this. What are the things in United States of America, in your society, that you think I am not able to accomplish unless I had your help as a white person? So this is the kind of things I'm wondering.
Can I
Like
refine
when
that
we're
question?
talking. Yeah,
Can
go
I
ahead.
refine the question you're asking here? Okay, the question that is being asked is how much government force is appropriate
I say zero.
to
I was talking about government
no,
force.
well, yeah, that's the thing. You're talking about affirmative action. Affirmative action is government force. Title IX is government
Yeah.
force. Border control is government force. The military is government force. There is government force in play in this question. And that's, to me, the primary question that's being asked in society. And I don't like that that is the question, because like you, I believe the correct amount of government force in the vast majority of situations is zero. And when it comes to my personal identity, I want zero government force used to allow me to express my identity. That's easy for me to say. I'm a cis het straight white male. So it's easy for me to say that because my gender expression is consistent with society's. I say that's easy for me to put out there, but I have been a victim of gendered violence, and I've been a victim of regular violence, and there's been a lot of competition in the identity sphere, and I've felt very persecuted at times. And so for people who are very marginalized, while I disagree that they should have much government force used on their behalf to protect them and to allow them to express their identity, I can certainly sympathize and understand why they would like government force to be on their side. I totally get it. And the more persecuted you are, the more you want somebody to call in officers with guns to protect you.
Mm.
And that argument has been one of the biggest arguments throughout history. Just how much government force should we use? When is it appropriate? When is it not appropriate? Now, if you're the government, you think it's always appropriate to use government force to get whatever you want. As individuals, we have different proclivities. And it's an important question.
I was thinking also with the general affirmative action, because that happens outside of it. Someone would be like, oh, we have a friends group, we're having an event. Oh, we got to invite like a black friend. Like there's that whole typical black friend type of thing. Or you're sitting in a group and then they say, oh, this is a black issue. So let the black person speak about this. Why do you need that? Oh, if you're not an X, you can't talk about X. That's something that doesn't come with government. That's something that's done in a personal life that they feel, oh, we need to empower these groups of people. Like, who gives you the power to empower someone like you're some god, like putting down a blessing on somebody? There's an aspect of that that kind of puts themselves on a higher level. And I think for some people, it's kind of like they might not necessarily feel that powerful and that much of an agent in their life. And they get a feeling of saying, okay, my life might not be that powerful, but at least I'm more powerful and better off than those group of people. And I noticed that with a race aspect of it. And you see with this transgender thing, like it's gotten into, and this is even one of the questions in the in the documentary, was like, can you be transracial? Like, can you switch to like a different race? Someone like, no, we're defining that more strict. But then at the same point, someone like Barack Obama is as half white as he is black, yet people are calling him black. So what is a black person? Can you be transracial in that kind of sense. Sean King, is Sean King a black person? Like, if you identify as something in a certain way, is there certain behaviors and certain things that, well, this is black vernacular, so only black people can say this? That simple one word that we can all think of right now. Why is it okay for a black person to say that, but it's not okay for like someone like Eminem to say it, even though Eminem is a lot more in that culture? I had like some random person in Rome who was working at some school, just I was there drawing, and then he just shouts that word out, "Mom," and I'm like, "What? I don't know you. Like, no, you don't call me that thing." But then somebody who I've grown up with and played football with, that's that word, because that's my relationship with that person. To me, that's how that kind of thing is. But so with that kind of thing, where is the actual thing? What do you think should actually be done in order to, like, what is the persecution in the past that was happening? What needs to be done now to kind of adjust those kind of situations for these 1.6 million people or more? Because, like you said, a few of them are antagonistic. A few of them are sending Matt Walsh the negative things. A few of them are going on and dancing in front of little children and on pride parades and things like that. Majority of the people are just in general good people. So majority of, I think, even people in the trans community have supportive people around them in their personal lives. And they don't necessarily feel the need to have entire groups of society that they don't know affirm them in a certain way. So in my experience, when you have this reaching out of affirmation from people you don't even know, that's normally people who are lacking that affirmation in their own life. People who don't have a supportive system. If you're like in your personal life, you're working with other people and you're helping each other out, you can feel that empowerment of other people in your life. So you don't necessarily feel the need to go and empower these random starving kids in Africa, because you already empower your nephews, your kids, your people in your neighborhood. So I think there is an aspect out there where there's some kind of who are the people involved in these spaces? Who are the people involved in those kind of activisms when they're just like, oh no, you don't understand what you're talking about. You're not asking the right question. And I'm like, no, he's asking his question. So can you answer his question from his kind of point of view? And then you can put your questions from your point of view instead of just saying that person is wrong because you think you have the right thing that you can't necessarily define. So in my estimation, if we're talking about things, you're talking about persecution, you're talking about need of help, you're talking about acceptance, you're talking about you need to be accepted as X. Please be able to define those three terms and that X in order for me to actually care, because I do care about general people, but I can't care about things I don't really understand and don't really know of.
Well, to also add to your point about death threats, I mean, how many are from actual trans people? I mean, it's been shown that a lot of BLM activists are upper class white kids. So it's like, how many of them are actually trans people who are offended versus people who feel like they're doing their version of the Lord's work by shutting this thing down, basically.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
on this question, that is a very, very difficult question. And I think part of the reason why it's difficult is because in the past we haven't been focused on finding the value in communities that were traditionally marginalized. Now, you mentioned something about strip shows, and I'd like to add in the trans story hour. Now, assuming the children have healthy parents and they have a healthy relationship with their parents, I actually believe that the drag show participants and the trans people at story hour are more at risk than the children, because children are extremely vicious little monsters. And so if you're going to have trans story hour and you're going to invite children there, make sure that the trans person who is there has thick skin and is not and can handle criticism and difficult questions, because little children don't know any better, and they are monsters and they are wild animals, and they need to be trained up properly so that they can behave well in society. I don't know when it's appropriate to send somebody else's kids to trans story hour. Now I have trans friends and I have family members who identify as trans, and when I have children, I'm going to introduce them to these people. Mm-hmm. And I'm probably just going to include them in my regular life, and I'm not going to take their personal identity into account when I send out birthday party invites and other things. Now, and that's the way it should be. That should be my choice. And when you have children, That should be your choice when those kinds of introductions are made. And how they're made is also important. I do take issue with activists getting involved with children when they have an agenda involved.
Yeah.
The primary agenda should be allowing parents as much autonomy as possible. And then the question is, where does child abuse begin? That's also a very, very difficult place. And that's one place where how much government force is appropriate in order to protect children. If you spank your kid, is that enough reason to call CPS? What about if you don't feed them for 3 days in a row? Yeah. Where is the line? Where is the line that you draw? What if you say mean things to your kid? Is that enough reason for CPS to come in and bring the police in with guns and have you arrested and your child taken away from you? And that I think child abuse is a good parallel for this question and this larger social question, because it illustrates just how difficult it is to know what is and is not appropriate. And definitions. What is child abuse? Well, you ask 100 different people, you're going to get 100 different answers. If you go into different ethnic and cultural communities, you're going to find some places where they say spare the rod and you spoil the child. So I'm going to beat my child into submission. And then you'll find other people who were horrified at the idea of beating a child. And then you have to have one-size-fits-all law enforcement to accommodate all of these different cultures and ethnicities and traditions. And that's how you get the mess that we've got here. It's called humanity.
Well, because I was going to say, like, the thing with, like, the Florida bill, like, Silas, I think you did a video on it. Like, I mean, if it literally doesn't say don't say gay in it, but if you look it up on YouTube, every major media outlet says the don't say gay bill in Florida. I mean, my understanding is it says you're not supposed to talk to small children about sexual content in general. Like, someone made the point you could even call it a don't say straight bill. But then what I ask is, why is there this desire to talk to small children about sexual stuff unless you're doing something, you know?
Yeah, and this is, like you said, most people are open and trying to get some level of understanding, trying to get some level of community, trying to get some level of cooperation. But when you have these kind of things, you're going to have certain people target those situations who have their own agendas and their own proclivities and their own intentions of trying to get certain things to certain people. You've seen this with all sorts of belief systems. Your average Christian doesn't really care if anybody else is Christian, but there's some evangelists who will go out there and they'll be like, I got to get into the school because I got to talk to the kids. I got to convert them. Otherwise, they're going to go to hell. You have a similar thing with something like the LGBT people. Most people are just LGBT. They're lesbians, they're gay, they're trans, or whatever, and that's just their life. They have their people in their life support them, and they don't really care. They just go to school and be a teacher. But some people are like, we've got to get this. Like, if I had this when I was a kid, I would have been a lot better. I would be a lot more comfortable. So I need to teach these kids these things and get into there and get this ideation into there. And there's other people who have done a lot more research into like the history of these things. And the history of these things there is a questionable history of some of these. And I think some people are using these tools with meaning well, but not understanding that the foundation of these things is very grimy. Look at the foundation of gender theory. Look at the foundation of Black Lives Matter was involved with some things of more like, it's supposed to be more for more like the LGBT people in the Black community, because the Black community is a lot more antagonistic towards different sorts of lifestyles than like the wider community in the United States of America. So you have certain backgrounds to these things. It's Marxist. There's some levels of subversion. The people who've come up with these terms like gender, the guy who took the things with like these little twins and stuff in the movie, you can get more stuff. There's some really creepy people that did some really bad negative things in there, even though there might be some positive things that end up helping a few people. What is the actual result of it? And there's one particular person that has been commenting on a few things, and Stephen and I have gone back and forth talking to this person, where it's not just what is a woman, what is a transgender, what is a child, what is right to be speaking. Like you said, what is child abuse? If my kid comes to me, if I have a kid and the kid comes to me and he's 5 and he says, okay, today I'm a dinosaur. And I'm like, okay, you're a dinosaur today. I'm going to act like a dinosaur. He's like, let's say it's a boy, it's a male child. And he says, okay, I'm a female dinosaur. I'll treat them like a female dinosaur. I need to start eating dinosaur food. I need to start shortening my arms so I can be like T-Rex. I need to look into like dental like things to like get bigger teeth so I can just eat. Okay, I would be like, no, you wait till like 18 and then you can shorten your arms and you can just. And there was also something in that movie where they said, if somebody is born and they say, okay, I don't feel like I'm in the right body, so I need to transition to the appropriate body. My sex, my biological sex, does not match my gender expression. So I need to go into medical procedures to start transitioning over. If somebody says my physical body with two arms doesn't fit my spatial identity of having one arm, how early is it to say that person can chop an arm off? How early is it to say, like, oh, when do you say that this is not a condition that we shouldn't reinforce, yet this is a condition that we realize is different from other people? Like, there's also some kind of condition where apparently if you give somebody scissors, they like run around and like damage themselves and things like that, hurt themselves. And I was like, okay, if you raise this person in a society where everybody was damaging themselves with scissors, would that same condition result in them not damaging themselves with scissors? Like, is it a reaction to the society, or is it a genetic, biological, in the mind thing saying you have to damage your physical body? Like, there's kind of questions in that. That's one question that I think came up in there that I had asked people, and he asked it to somebody who was involved in, I think he or he was a transgender woman, born a man, identifies as a woman now, is a doctor, has done the most surgeries in the United States of America. And
Yeah.
they said that they considered somebody who wanted to chop an arm off to be abhorrent. And how come they don't really apply the same thing to somebody who wants to chop their breasts off or have their penis turned inside out and put into their body, or to be a condition that shouldn't be reinforced? Yet, like somebody else towards the end of the documentary was saying she had gone through, she had gone through, and now she was identified. So he uses some term they. Let's just go with they. They had gone through a condition, born a female, and then now was living as a male. Okay. But they were saying they wish when they were younger there was some sort of therapy to address the situation, to maybe say, like, maybe you're going through a condition and not just say, because you're doing this, let's take you towards further down this road. Like, I've also heard some LGBTQ people saying, lesbians and gay people are saying, no, it's okay to just be a guy that likes guys. It's okay to just be a gal that likes gals. Because you're a lesbian, because you're gay, does not necessarily mean you also have to transition so you can fit that cis kind of hetero relationship role and be the man in the relationship. You can be a woman who's in love with a woman. You can be a man who's in love with a man without transitioning into a woman so you can love that man, or into a man so you can love that woman that you already love. So there's these questions coming in just with those situations where it's like, where is the situation of reinforcing something? When is something appropriate to talk to children about it? What is the actual position that society should have in this whole interaction with these groups of people who are as valid in existence as anybody else? Yeah.
Well, that's the question. That really is the question. And I think one of the biggest problems that we have here is the desire to join a team. People have this innate instinct of joining teams. We're cooperative. And when you're cooperating with somebody, you're on the same team. And when we form teams about questions like this, then the struggle becomes more important than truth, and winning becomes more important than anything else. And what we need to do is we need to avoid joining teams and focus on helping people express themselves authentically and completely. Because if somebody does have gender dysphoria, if somebody is legitimately transsexual, if they literally are a woman born in a man's body or a man born in a woman's body, then the best way to resolve those issues is through identity exploration and affirmation. Camille Paglia says that she thinks she is transgender, and she has no interest in going through any kind of sex reassignment surgery, partly because she's very old compared to 12-year-olds who are discovering their gender identity now. And she likes to think that she wouldn't have wanted to transition if she was 12, but she still thinks that she's a man in a woman's body. At least that's my understanding of her position. And she has very, very sophisticated, complicated ideas about gender, personas, sex, and what it means to be a human being. And the most important thing that we're doing right now as a society, I believe, is we are encouraging children to explore their identities without shame. If you allow children to explore who they are and without putting your agenda in there. Now, as a parent, you do have an agenda. You want to make sure that your child is healthy and learning and growing and doing things that doesn't disrupt the family or the neighborhood or the larger community. That's an agenda that you have to have. And inside of that agenda, helping that child explore their identity maximally is the healthiest way forward. And it's not on me to tell somebody else how to explore their identity. And if your 5-year-old wants to be a dinosaur today, yeah, that's great. If they want to be a dinosaur every day for a whole year, how much of that is in interfering with everything else, being a part of the family, being a part of the community, being a strong, healthy individual? Those are important questions, and maybe some 5-year-olds can pretend to be a dinosaur every day for a whole year. I suspect very few 5-year-olds are going to want to do that. They're going to want to be a fireman some days, and maybe a cop another day, or a soldier, or a nurse, or a doctor, or they're going to pretend to be mommy or daddy, or who knows what else. That's the whole thing about being that young. You have this super active imagination. And if you're not constantly trying new things, then that's cause for some concern. In most cases, some kids know at 3 years old what they want to do for a living, and they just lock in on that and they just go. All right, that's great. And people who are legitimately transgender, many of them do know when they're 3. But I've heard stories of gay men who didn't know they were gay until their 20s, and gay men who knew they were gay as one of their earliest realizations. Identity is different for everybody. And I suspect if people were more positively affirmed in their gender explorations, then there would be less dysphoria. There would be fewer questions about surgery and transitioning, and there would be more healthy people out there.
Yeah. And I think that is key. Like, what is the positive affirmation? What is the place that we're going to have? Like, and I think a lot of this is, why do we care? Why are the 3 men here actually talking about this situation? And I took some notes down. I'm just going to read this thing I wrote down, which was something that I think was one of the things that stuck out the most in this documentary. This is something you might have seen from Matt Walsh, even if you haven't seen the documentary, was his appearance in Dr. Phil, and this was actually in there. And this is a typical argument that I hear, not just in talking about this issue with LGBTQ, but just in general, when people are talking about certain things that they're not able to actually define, or when you try to ask them, you try to get more input on something, one of the typical things that they say is this person, I think it was I don't know if she was the doctor that was doing it, or she was somebody actually had transitioned. I think she was somebody who was involved in the field of gender identities and things like that. But then she asked Matt Walsh, she's like, part of me is wondering why you care so much, when he had asked her, like, what is a woman? Can you define woman? And Matt answers that he cares about the truth. This is something I think the 3 of us, part of the reason we're friends, that we seem to care about truth over a lot of other things, a lot more than other people. That's also why I really like how kids are just open with it. They're just living their genuine selves. And it's like, I see this, I'm going to say, like, I could be right, I'm really wrong, but this is what I'm thinking, I'm going to say it. So I kind of appreciate that from the 2 of you, and I appreciate people who do that. That's also the group of people that I'm kind of looking to actually be with. So I understand looking to be with a certain group of people. But what are these people looking for? So she says, what are you talking about? So he said, Matt Walsh says he cares about truth. So do I. But if they did care about what other people cared about, then they wouldn't care if we called them whatever that we wanted. So I care at the very least about why you want me to affirm you or participate in what you claim to care about. I'm going to make, let's say, like, if I'm going to make some goat milk kidney for dinner, I'm going to identify those goat milks and the kidneys as a vegetable because I identify as a vegetarian. If you keep insisting I call it meat, I can be justified in asking you, why my truth about my kidneys being vegetables matters to you and dismiss you as unnecessarily combative. But if you are coming over for dinner and let's say you're a vegan, and I serve you those delectable goat kidneys in coconut milk, and they are really good. You should really try making it if you do eat meat. And you ask me, and I tell you, like, okay, that's a vegetable. You are well in your rights to ask me why I'm defining these goat kidneys as a vegetable. You can ask me, what is a vegetable? Then I say, like, well, this goat only ate vegetables and it's all its life. So technically, all the cells in its body are built from elements that were initially plants before. So technically, all the fats, proteins, and carbs in present were atoms that were are all vegetable based. So I would understand you looking at me and saying, no, that is still meat. We define that as meat. That is not a vegetable. Then if I'm sending my food to other people, you're not here for dinner, I'm sending my food to other people who are looking for meat-free dishes, I understand why you'd be concerned on their behalf. It generally accepted the idea is that meats cannot be a vegetable. Even though some might still act and say that some other things can be meat, like soy-based juices, you can where technically you're actually putting proteins and things together that are pretty much the same as meat. So like technically you can say that actually is meat even though it's built from other things. So if I'm training other people, other chefs, and I'm training little chefs, little young kids who want to be chefs when they grow up and they say, okay, look, no, vegetables are fluid. You can be meat and vegetable fluid. Just make whatever you want at whatever restaurant. Just call your restaurant whatever you want. And when people come in, if they say they're vegan, it doesn't matter. It's a spectrum. There's a spectrum of proteins and meats. So you can just call anything whatever you want. So if I tell a vegan that they don't want to eat my meat because they're trans veg phobic, does not mean that that is even a thing. So that is my kind of general thing of like, I don't like people who want other people to do something or to see the world as they see it. And then when those people ask about how they see the world, they come out and say things like, why do you even care? Like, maybe people care because you're actually you're not keeping that world just to yourself. It's not just your private world. And some of those people, even if it is your private world, they want to let your private world be part of their world. And in order to be part of their world, at least speaking for me, people who like the truth, it helps me to understand what you're thinking. That's how it is with kids. That's how it has been for me. I had kind of 3 different childhoods. When you move from a different society, a different culture, you're relearning a lot of things where like there's kids who are 5 when I got to when I got to like Kenya, there's kids who are 5 who kind of knew more about life in Kenya because they lived in Kenya for 5. Then when I got to the United States of America when I was 10, I had 5 years in Kenya, 5 years in freezing again here. I was saying 5 years in France, and I found that people had took certain things for granted. And these things, and I'm relearning a lot of these things. So I think there's a general thing of if you're trying to get people to understand you, if you're trying to get people to participate in your reality tunnel, it makes sense that those people will have questions about how you view your reality tunnel. And if you're not able to use language, use English, use different kinds of words, different kinds of communication in order to set. And here with communication, if you want somebody to engage with you, it's up to you to satisfy their level of understanding. Talking about, they're not excluding you. You're not able to actually participate with them. You're also excluding. Yeah, this is a term. I don't know if it's excluding, but if I'm unable, like right now, I'm unable to really describe what I'm thinking in my mind. So I would completely understand if people who are listening to this are struggling to really get my point of view. And I strive to do better and better at trying to communicate my point of view to people who I want to communicate with and have an understanding with. And it just seems like some people who say they want communication, who say they want acceptance, they say they want to participate with people, it just doesn't seem that way. Thing, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, is there anything else from the movie in specific or this conversation that you wanna talk about, or just wind it down now?
I'm ready to wind it down personally. I didn't know if anyone had anything else.
Ed?
I think we're about done.
Yeah. So that was it. I don't know. There's maybe other movies that we might watch recently, but we've talked about with Edward and Stephen. I'm going to post soon. I'm going to post I Know Great People, where you can get to know more about Ed and some of the things that he does. There's already an I Know Great People with Stephen. If you're on this channel, you've probably seen a lot of other conversations that I had with Stephen and other things. And both of the 3 of us and one other person, we've been in discussions of getting more content where we actually talk about conversations and do things on a more regular basis. So looking forward to that. There's also other projects that we're doing as the world is reopening post pandemic of I guess it's discussable origin now. People are kind of discussing like its potential origins, but it's kind of the world is opening up again, and I think there's a lot of change. And I think part of the change, pun intended, we're transitioning from I think an information age to an age of understanding, and part of that understanding is also the changing of things. Because yes, people took things for granted, but I don't even think they had defined the things. It was kind of just things that they took for granted. It's just the way things were, the default. And if you're listening to this now, chances are you live in the best possible time it's existed to be alive in that location that you're living in. If you're feeling down and out, understand that you live in a time when you can reach out to people. There's people out there who want to understand you. There's people out there who are willing to help. It might not be somebody who's just living right next to you. It might not be somebody who's just in the main group that you're in, but you can reach out and find other people and find actual understanding. And there's no reason to have these barriers, these breakdowns, this confusion, these problems that are just kind of ginned out of nothingness, and when we can get past those things. I don't know if that makes any sense. Just
Yeah.
kind of rambling. Okay, so that's it for me. I didn't say my name. I'm Silas. This is the channel Dying Alive. We talk about a lot of things, a lot of other content here. Stephen, Edward, stay on a little longer. We should finish up. But guys, gals, and everything else in between, thank you all very much for listening to this conversation about what is a woman. I think we discussed it enough. And till next time, goodbye.
Bye. Thank you.